future, talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
The Marla and Dave radio experience begins in 3, 2, 1.
Now, if you're ready, we will begin.
Welcome to the Marla and Dave radio show. This is reality radio with a couple that keeps it real. Current events, pop culture, music, relationships, fitness, the hot topics of the day. Marla and Dave Thomas. This is the Marla and Dave radio show. Real radio. Turn up!
Welcome to the Marla and Dave Show. Yeah, Marla's trying to jump the gun as usual.
Anyway, I'm Marla.
And I'm Dave.
And you know what? It is indeed a mad world. And we love to talk about it, but we don't want to talk at you. We want you to talk with us.
Absolutely. So we need you to call the show, join the conversation, especially today. If you have questions about the topic, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but the call-in number is 323-284-7826 to talk to Marla and Dave, she and I.
And also, we've got special guests that will be joining us today, and we'll talk about that. But Dave, always the recap. First of all, thanks again to Kelly Hart and Greg Gilmore for joining us last week and helping and giving us great information on our last week's topic.
Absolutely.
So that was awesome having them. I have to always give credit. First of all, I'm really not this attractive. Brooke Cheevers does this for
That's
me.
not really Marla sitting right there, in case you were wondering.
I'm always in some kind of a mood, and it represents music. So I'm gonna ask Tony to hit me.
Sick, will you take 'em back every time? 'Cause I love it so amazing, and it makes you so sick. When it makes you
Okay,
go
now.
and compromise
Love is amazing and it makes you
everything
sick.
the night before.
Right.
You wouldn't do. Sick.
What do you have? Don't try to talk about my song, trump my song, and tell me what kind of mood you're in.
Okay, well, Tony, hit me.
Pajam thriller. I'm not gonna be afraid no more.
Yeah.
Fear don't live here no more. I'm not gonna be afraid no more. Pain just walked out the door.
Hey.
That spirit ain't here with me. God didn't put that in me. But the spirit of power and love and a sound mind.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. Now my song is really apropos for what we're talking about today.
According to you.
Because I'm not going to be afraid of Ebola.
Ebola is the topic. I think be afraid, be very afraid. I don't ever think we get all the information when you're talking about something that scares society, such as a virus that could essentially just turn your inside to liquid, you bleed out, and you die.
Well,
Is that too harsh?
see, and again, you have listened to a lot of hearsay and a lot of things that people are saying.
Oh, and you-
not
and you-
too many people are bleeding out.
And you've actually controlled the virus.
No.
I'm listening, but
No,
because why?
I pay attention.
Okay. To what?
See, it's like, one of the guests that we're going to be joined in studio, who actually we are joined in studio today with, is your mom.
Exactly.
And she can attest that Marlene McCraw, the lovely, my mother, your mother, my mother-in-law.
no.
Watch
Yeah.
this.
Don't try to claim
and
all
she
the
can
mothers.
attest
You
to
went-
the fact that you don't really listen and you're not that obedient and you don't pay attention. Mimi,
She's not gonna.
she's affectionately known by us.
Don't comment just yet, Mom. I'm still making my point here about Ebola because as you're saying that I shouldn't be afraid, I actually just took a flight with my mother, and my mother is the one that gave me hospital-strength industrial dry your hands out by sight wipes, and she said, clean everything around you. Wipe the seats down, wipe the trays. So that gave me reason, David, Reginald Thomas, to have a small bit of fear instilled in me. And somewhere in the universe, maybe in this room, it was floating around out of somebody
Okay,
that it could
okay.
possibly
Yeah, blah,
be
blah,
more
blah.
that we're not being told.
I just want you guys to know that you can join our mad world online at the M&D Show, both on Instagram and Twitter, or on Facebook at the Marla and Dave Show. When we come back from our mad news break, we'll find out if our fears about the Ebola virus are serious or silly.
You're listening to the Marla and Dave radio show on the Universal Broadcast Network.
Okay, so
current events, pop culture, the hot topics of the day. It's time for Mad News on the Marla and Dave Radio Show. Ladies and gentlemen, Marla and Dave.
So here's what's popping in the Mad News this week. In case you guys didn't hear, it was a big news story that Tamika Tiny Harris of the reality show
Tamika Harris, otherwise known as Tiny.
Tiny, right?
Yeah.
Tamika, that of T.I. and Tiny, she had actual silicone eye color implants put onto her eye surgically, and this surgery is so risky that it's illegal in the United States.
So get this. Where did she go to get it done?
Africa.
Africa.
She
Wow.
did, Dave. And the doctor said that the surgery, and I'm reading, which is illegal in America, is perfectly safe, but patients have to follow a strict instruction during their 2 to 3 month recovery period. So my question to you is, A, people, this is plastic surgery. What to me, and I'm pro plastic surgery. I've had my little
I might get colored
situations lifted.
implants that actually kind of bulge my eyes out. How's
Okay,
that?
you won't do that, Dave, because
Whoa.
you don't even have a tattoo. You don't want anything that's going to alter you at all. But what about the risk? Is there something that you seriously would do that in any plastic surgery at all that you could see yourself taking some type of risk?
Well, it's definitely not worth the risk to me. I would never do something like that, but I guess to each his own. And
I mean, I feel that way about my face. I just feel like let my face age naturally. If you mess my body up, I can kind of I can wear a t-shirt. Matter of fact, I can wear a Marla and Dave t-shirt. Wow.
Well, I just hope Tiny follows those strict instructions.
I think
so that everything will be fine.
I think that its vanity is a killer.
I still have a question whether or not it should be legal or in America. If it's so safe, why isn't it legal? That's my question. But there you go. That's the Mad News. And we want to remind you guys about Ask Marla and Dave. Go to the Marla and Dave website, www.marlandave.com. Fill out the form.
And if you don't ask us, we can't tell you. That's not.
This ain't your mama's radio show. Can you handle the truth? Then get ready for a real radio experience. Ladies and gentlemen, Marla and Dave.
Okay, so Dave mentioned earlier, I want to formally welcome to the Marla and Dave Show the lady who welcomed me into the world. I was such a small, happy baby. I was born with 0 complications. And with that is why she has that smile on her face, because sorry Brian, that's my brother, am her greatest joy. This is my mother, Marlene, and Mom, you're also a nurse administrator. So you have a lot of information with this particular topic of Ebola. So tell Dave why exactly he should take Jay Moss's song to heart and be very afraid.
Well, first of all, I need to clear up one thing that's incorrect. You were not a small person when you were born.
Yeah, we apologize for that.
Yes, let's clear that up. 10 pounds and 3 ounces is not necessarily what I call small.
Yeah, that's a little stressful.
And
You should have had a
uncomplicated-
notion from the beginning.
Definitely. I should have known that. And she came here on her own terms.
Yeah.
Okay,
you should
well,
have had a
just-
notion from day one.
Oh, yeah, just for starters.
Now, we want to say that we call her Mimi. Her name is Marlene McCraw. She is the chief of nurses. Is that true, Mimi?
Correct.
Yeah, she is a chief. So she knows what she's talking about. One of the questions that I have, and maybe I can get right into it, is what actually is Ebola? What is Ebola?
Well, Ebola is an infectious virus, actually, and it is manifested by bodily emissions, and its first symptom is usually fever. It is transmitted by bodily fluids.
Okay, when I
And
was
it-
actually...
it,
go ahead.
It was originated actually by bats. That's where it came from.
Okay, fruit bats. This is kind of what they say are natural carriers of the Ebola virus. Now,
Correct.
Marla's going to handle some other business, but from when I actually did some research online, the Ebola virus disease, EVD, also known as Ebola hemorrhagic fever, or simply Ebola, is a disease of humans and other primates caused by Ebola viruses. And that's one of the things that kind of kind of stuck with me. There seems to be more than one strain of Ebola.
Yes, and it seems to be mutating, and that's what kind of has people frightened.
Well, Tony Fontana is in our chat room. He said to tell you hello. Sandra Hawkins actually said she's in Dallas, and her main hospital is Presbyterian, and she's scheduled for a procedure later this month. And honestly, she thought about not going, but she's not going to let the fears of Ebola stop her from going to the hospital that has given her such great service in the past. And so that's people are actually afraid, and we're going to find out today if their fears are warranted or not.
And we have another guest who's going to help us sort this out. We have joining us right now online, who's calling in. We have Dr. Dean Norman, who is a board-certified infectious disease specialist. So if we answering the question, I'm hoping Dean can help me smack Dave down and give him some more information.
Why is it about smacking Dave down?
Okay,
I
I'm
thought,
sorry.
For me, I'm not really trying to
Well, 'cause
outdo you or
let me explain
make
this.
this a contest. I want people to get the truth
I
and
want
understand.
people to get the truth, but I want you to know that if you happen to go anywhere near the infected regions, you cannot come home without me imposing a 21-day mandatory quarantine on you. I just want to say that. So get that in your head right now. We like to welcome Dr. Norman to our show.
All right. Dr. Norman, are you there?
Yes.
Okay,
Awesome.
well, welcome to the Marla and Dave Show.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
We really appreciate you stopping by. So let me get back to that question that I just posed to Marlene. What exactly is the Ebola virus?
All right, the Ebola virus is what was formerly known as a hemorrhagic fever virus because when patients became terminally ill, they developed actually hemorrhage. It was first discovered back in about 1976, and to understand a little bit about it, I have to digress a little bit. We think the reservoir in the wild, and this is in Africa, is in fruit bats. And the bats bite or somehow get eaten by primates, and including monkeys, gorillas, etc. And they then occasionally are eaten or interact with humans, and it spills over into humans. The problem with that humans have is that when they get the virus, they can infect other humans. The virus itself is a simple RNA virus. It's been there are other viruses very similar to Ebola that have been studied in the past, and I think that for your listeners, what they need to know is that it's a viral infection. The bad news, it has a high mortality rate, 20 to 90%, and depending on the type of medical facilities that you have. The good news is it's really hard to get unless the patient is very ill. So it's hard to just casually transmit the virus. In fact, it doesn't occur. Transmission does not occur if you're asymptomatic, whether or not you're infected with the virus. As far as we know, it just has a very low probability to be transmitted. As you get sicker, develop fevers, chills, night sweats, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. As you get sicker, then you become more infectious. And it is in contact with those body fluids that persons become infected. It's been, as far as I know, not reported that anybody has been infected from people coughing and droplet infection. So we don't think that occurs in nature. So that's very good news. That means if somebody who has the virus incubating in them is sitting across from you in an airplane, you are not going to get infected.
I shouldn't throw on a plastic, wrap myself in saran wrap, and go screaming to another seat that's empty. That shouldn't happen.
Well,
you could do that, but you'd be very uncomfortable and you wouldn't be.
Well, Marlene, right quick, what are you doing? What are the hospitals doing to sort of get ready to protect people?
Are you bracing
and
for
patients?
some type of Ebola wave?
Well, what we're doing is we want to make sure about people's travel history, and if they've been in contact with anybody that is currently infectious. So each and every patient that we come in contact with, we want to make sure that we know that history.
Okay.
Well, okay. So, and I have to jump back in. So, Dr. Norman, don't viruses, and correct me if I'm wrong, I dropped out of medical school a little bit early. Do viruses actually mutate? So, in other words, what you're telling us now are all the facts that you have now. Are there more facts, or is there more information that could just present itself at a later date, and then we're like, dang it.
Well, that's a good question. And the question is, could the virus, two questions actually, could the virus be weaponized? In other words, some horrible dictator somewhere work on the virus and create a weapon? That's the first question. The second question, can the virus change and infect people through aerosolization, people just coughing? And the answer is, one, it's an incredibly difficult virus to work with, so it's not going to be one that's going to be weaponized, so that's good news. The second is that as an RNA virus, as far as we know, these are very, very difficult to actually mutate to the point that they can become infectious through aerosolization. So that's not likely to occur. And by not likely, I think it's going to be extremely remote. Would it shock people if it did occur? No, but it would be very surprising because we haven't seen it in nature before. These types of viruses actually mutating to the point that they become more infectious. In this particular virus case, if you look at what's happened in Western Africa, most of the cases are transmitted to either healthcare workers who are caring for critically ill patients or to people who touch the corpses, which have by that time, you have a large number of viruses in the secretion, as many as 1 billion viruses in a milliliter of body fluid. So they're highly infectious. And apparently there are burial practices.
No, go ahead. That's just our music saying it's almost time to go to the break.
Keep going.
And Dr. Norman,
burial practices in Western Africa, unfortunately, where people touch the dead, and that's highly infectious if, in fact, the person died from Ebola virus. So trying to change cultures, and the Army of Healthcare Workers have moved into Western Africa to really see if they can stem this epidemic.
Well,
well, Dr. Norman, are you going to be able to stay with us for the next segment as well?
We have a couple more questions for you, but when we come back, I want to ask Dr. Norman what he feels is necessary to protect. So we'll be right back.
Guys, listen up. Learn something. 26 years of marriage from two unique perspectives equals 52 years of relationship experience. It's time for Ask Marla and Dave. Answers to your questions about life, love, and relationship based on Marla and Dave's real-life experience. It's about to get real. Ask Marla and Dave.
Okay, well, it's time for Ask Marla and Dave, and you can also ask Marla and Dave, Marla and I, any question that you would like. Just go to our website, www.marlaanddave.com, go to the Ask Marla and Dave page, and submit your form. We'll get to it right here on the show.
Okay, here's the question that is being asked to us this week, Dave. Marla and Dave, you've been married for a long time. I've been married for 5 years, but I'm bored in the bed.
Wow, that was quick.
You should wake up. I really love my husband, but need some suggestions to revive our sex life. Dave, can you help her?
Well, I would have an immediate question of why do you think the sex life died? If it needs reviving,
well, she can't answer any questions.
Either it's
so
died or it's dying. So that would be my first question. So, and usually when that happens, it's usually because, sex has become, your intimate relationship has become so routine that you just
boring.
You don't really think about it, and you don't put any energy into it. Like, nobody likes to eat the same food for dinner every night, so you make something new.
But you are the same food, Dave. Same food, stroganoff. You, 26 years, same food.
Here's what I'm saying. So dress your stroganoff self up a little differently. Do some role playing
Put some
and
cheese on it.
Have some fun.
Put it in a different bowl. Eat that stroganoff with a different spoon or fork. Maybe sop it up right out of the bowl with your lips on the bowl and just suck it right down.
Ask Marla and Dave.
Welcome back to the Marla and Dave radio show. Marla and Dave want to talk to you. Phone lines are open at 323-284-7826. 323-284-7826.
So we're back on the line. We've got Marlene McCraw, my beautiful mother here, who is a nurse, and we've also have the privilege of having Dr. Dean Norman join us, who is a board-certified infectious disease specialist. Dr. Norman, even before we get into the question that I asked you right before we went to the break, do you agree with the quarantine situation? I got to just ask you that.
You mean what? Some states have imposed mandatory.
Yes, like
when,
yes.
Well, it depends on. I have no problem at all with asking people to monitor their temperatures twice a day for 21 days. But again, until your temperature goes up, you become symptomatic. You're really not at risk. So the science does not back up those stringent requirements that some of the states have imposed. Now, that being said, I can fully understand the fear that other employees and other folks in the public might have with having people who possibly do have fevers and are symptomatic walking around. So I understand the fears, but those stringent quarantines are not based on science.
So, Mom, let me ask you a question. So you're a chief of nurses. So you have a nurse, and your nurse has been to Africa, and she's been in one of the hot zones, and she comes back. As an administrator who has to deal with the effect of many other people, what do you do? Just for peace of mind, do you lock this person up?
Well, you don't lock them up, but you have a fear factor of the other employees, and so it would be to our greater good to probably marginalize this person for a period of time. Otherwise, everybody is in panic mode. And you can't always 100% trust what that employee is going to say. So for the 3 weeks, it would be better to marginalize them.
Well, I want to get to something that Dr. Norman alluded to before we went to the break. And he said that the virus has not been shown to be spread in droplet form. But now I'm confused at that a little bit, Dr. Norman, because the guidelines say that it's spread by bodily fluids, but is that just that it's not enough bodily fluid in the droplet of your saliva from coughing or sneezing or something like that?
That's correct. You don't have enough viruses in the lung until way late in the disease to cough and have these droplets spread the infection. And way late in the disease, it's certainly possible that your lungs would contain enough viruses to spread. But we know that the virus is not, at least as far as we know, is not aerosolized. There have been experiments in animal models that show that animal models exposed to high concentrations of the virus in fluids can get the virus if it's aerosolized, but it's not been shown in human-to-human transmission.
Okay, so now that brings up another point. I know that there are more than one strain of the Ebola virus. Now, wasn't the Reston strain, wasn't it spread through the air, but it wasn't infectious to human beings, but wasn't that part of the Reston strain?
Yeah. I'm not going to argue with you. You've done a lot of reading. That particular virus is not infectious to humans, but I don't know whether or not that one can be spread through aerosolization. But the Ebola virus, the one that we're all worried about, that one is not spread by aerosolization.
So now, when you say the Ebola virus, what I'm asking, I guess, is there more than one strain of the Ebola virus?
Right. There's 5 big classification strains, of which the Ebola is the number one, but the other names escape me. But the Reston virus is the one that's not, as far as we know, infectious to human beings.
Right. So, and I think I read somewhere that this particular strain is referred to as the Western Zaire strain. Does that ring a bell?
I think you might be right.
Yes.
On that one.
We have a question from someone online, Dr. Norman, who's asking you this. He says, Brian Davis asked, during the Zaire Ebola outbreak in 1976, there were 280 deaths. There was poor health care and infrastructure then as well as now. How did we get to now having 5,000 deaths in 2014?
At about 13,000 cases, and there are many that feel that those are underreported. Clearly, I'm not an expert in the politics of all this, but there clearly was a collapse in the healthcare epidemiology in these countries, particularly in Liberia, where the most cases occurred. And it was interesting to me, in Nigeria, which really had a much better system and infrastructure, was able to very much limit their outbreak, and they're now Ebola-free. So the whole idea of dealing with Ebola really is simple as isolation, reducing contacts, protecting healthcare workers. But when you have the systems break down and the dead are carried away, and in ceremonies people are touching the corpses, you have a real breakdown in your public health. So that involves not medicine so much as basic politics, economics, and it's really a good lesson for the West that if we do not economically help these countries deal with these public health problems, they'll spill over into the rest of the world, and that's what's happened.
Well, Marlene, you mentioned that if we quarantine or issue these unnecessary quarantines, that seems that the political side of the equation seems to be trying to impose. It would make the healthcare workers reluctant to actually go over and do exactly what Dr. Norman was just saying and help out with the control of the disease.
Well, that is true. You know, people would hesitate to go over there if they feel like that when they come back, they're going to be quarantined. But I mean, you know, that just goes with the territory.
I just don't understand why we're talking about quarantine like it's the end of the world.
But hold on, because my real question is, why aren't the politicians listening to the healthcare workers and the scientists who are actually been over there dealing with it in the field? They would seem like they would know more about whether it was as dangerous as the politicians seem to be trying to make us afraid and trying to say.
If you're asking me, I agree with Marlene in one important aspect. If a healthcare worker comes back from Western Africa, I think they should be closely monitored for 21 days before actually going into a healthcare facility. It's just managing the rest of the healthcare staff and worrying about other patients that are compromised. I think it's overkill in some ways, but in other ways it makes more sense. I think politicians have to balance many things, and if we look at global warming as a good example, where politicians may in their heart of hearts know that this is a huge issue, but in order to get reelected each year they make compromises. And I think in this case the strict isolation was a compromise with the population who was very panicked. It's hard to criticize politicians when they're the ones that are held accountable for making the wrong decision. Right. But it's certainly not based on science. That's my only.
I have another question from the chat room. Sandra Hawkins is asking, does anybody have definite information on how the two nurses got Ebola since they were protected with their clothing, and I guess they say they were under the proper protocol? Mimi?
However, they weren't really.
Some answer to that, and that if you look at what the current CDC recommendations are for the personal protective equipment, this wasn't followed 100%. If you noticed, the nurses taking care of the Ebola patients did not have their neck covered. That was just one thing I noticed.
Yes.
The way they put the gloves together, use tape, I think, we're not recommending using tape anymore. So there were technical violations of protocols that we know now the CDC is recommending. It's hard to criticize the hospital for that period of time. My guess is they had unprotected skin, and we saw that on the videos.
Okay, I'm going
to
hold that thought right there. We're going to ask you to hang around. We have one more segment. We got a lot of questions coming in, Dr. Norman and Marlene. Oh, I called you Marlene. Ooh, I can get away with it. Anyway, because the last thing and most important thing is we'd love to get your professional opinions about how we can protect ourselves. And I have a fun little quiz. Is it safe or is it silly? We'll be back.
It's time for the Marla and Dave Doghouse.
Oh,
Marla has something that should
did
put
it.
Dave in the doghouse. Dave has something that should put Marla in the doghouse. You decide who gets a biscuit and who gets busted and ends up in the doghouse.
Okay, well, the question was asked, who's in the doghouse? They're anxious to find out if Marla's going to stay in the doghouse. Marla, you better bring it this week.
Do you want to be first? Because you're already in there, is my opinion.
Do you want me to be first?
You feel free.
Well, okay, so many of you who follow us online through our social networks know that I actually taught Marla's class for her this week. I subbed for her as the instructor. I was the fitness trainer this week, and I taught her class, and so I was there on time, right on the nose, and I was waiting for the class to show up. So, they were trickling in. I guess one
Wrap this up,
people in
'cause
the class came in, and it was like 5 minutes late. The other people came we didn't actually get started till 20 minutes after the class was supposed to start. So I finally, while we were working out during one of our rest periods, I say, why are you guys so late? They said, well, Marla comes in all the time. She's always late. So we have learned to actually come in when we think she's going to be there. And Marla was giving me so much grief about making her late. Her class says she's late almost every day.
Okay.
She should stay in the doghouse. That's Alpo material.
Bottom line is, you don't need to be the one to make me late. Let's just get rid of that.
Goodness.
Now, let me tell you why you need to be in the doghouse. And I'm nominating all of the guys, the other Los Angeles Take 6 members, to also be in the doghouse with you. David is notorious for telling me when he's coming in on his flight. Last night, I went to pick him up from the airport, and I was sitting in a nearby parking lot for 1 hour plus, waiting on him to get his bags and to do whatever. Why can't the three of you carpool?
The reason why I should not be in the doghouse because I don't fly the plane.
Hold on.
I don't work for the airlines.
The bottom line is,
I just ride.
Why do all 3 wives need to pick you up, or 2 wives and a girlfriend?
Anyway,
or
Marla's going to stay in the doghouse. Make sure you guys contact us. Call us at 323-284-7826 or join us in the chat room.
Resources.
Anyway, we're going to get right back to the show.
What's the action?
You'll laugh. You'll learn. You'll get mad.
Tony is chastising
You'll
me,
get happy.
Marla, one time
But you won't be.
Tony, you're not my daddy.
This is the Marla and Dave Radio Show on the Universal Broadcast Network.
Tony, you are not my daddy. You can't tell me. Anyway, back with Dr. Norman.
Okay, so we're going to ask both Marlene. We're going to ask Marlene first, and then we're going to ask Dr. Norman to weigh in. What is the best way for we in the general public to protect ourselves in this fearful environment about this deadly disease? Because it's really a level 4 infectious disease, a level 4 virus. So it can be very dangerous. But should we be as afraid as a lot of people are saying we should be? And how can we protect ourselves?
Well, one of the main things is what we call universal precautions, and that is to wash your hands.
Okay.
Something as simple as that. Wash your hands.
Well, that's pretty scary,
Well,
especially if the nurse, I know a nurse would know to wash their hands, but they're working there with the patient and they got the virus. So
Well, just to dovetail on what Dr. Norman said, it isn't clear that the cover-up that they had on was not it. We think that it was permeable instead of impermeable.
yeah, but
That's
just because
scary.
a
Your
little
neck.
droplet gets on your neck.
That's what I'm saying. That would literally erase some of the things that you're saying, which is how hard it is to catch. If a droplet of fluid that has the virus in it can land on my neck, and the next thing you know, I'm infected. Hello? That's a little scary.
Dr. Norman, you want to weigh in on that?
Okay, so I think one of the reasons that you're getting the disconnect is a real simple one. Remember, the patient, I think his name was Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
was critically ill, getting dialyzed. You're not going to run into a critically ill patient on the street. They're not able to walk. They're going to be in an intensive care unit. So you're not going to get exposed to someone who has large amounts of virus in their droplets. It's just not going to happen. So you're not going to be exposed to blood, diarrhea, whatever, from a patient who's critically ill because they're going to be in a hospital.
They won't be mobile. Okay. Let me make
They're
this.
going to be exposed to somebody who may be incubating the virus or maybe has just begun a fever. That would be your only risk of exposure, I think, unless something turns upside down. And then you have a very low risk of getting the infection.
Well, let me just ask them
Marla,
these quick
can I
questions.
pause you before you ask
Yes,
the question?
You can.
Because right quick, we've got 3 votes for you. You are still in the doghouse.
It's
Anyway,
whatever.
go ahead.
Dave, next time you don't get to go
I
first.
speak Marla.
Okay. This is for Dr. Norman and for Marlene, super nurse, phantasmo, mommy, Marlene, Mimi. I'm going to make this quick quiz right quick. So my question is, when it comes to protecting ourselves from the virus, I want to just play a little quick round of safe or silly. Number 1, Dr. Norman and Marlene. Sterilizing every surface that you come in contact with. Safe or silly?
Silly.
Dr. Norman?
Very silly.
Okay, so I'm already looking pretty silly. Number
Well,
two.
you come into contact with your husband. You want to sterilize him.
I do, Dr. Norman. I'm glad you brought that up. So, Dave, just bear with that process. You just heard it from Dr. Norman. It's
I'll take
okay.
a dip. Sterilization.
Number two, loading up on immune-boosting vitamins such as vitamin C. Safe or silly?
Safe.
Dr. Norman?
It's safe, but it won't do anything.
Which makes it silly. Okay, and the last one is covering your face with a mask whenever you're out in public. Safe or silly?
Silly.
It's silly, but in terms of you have your own respiratory infection, and I want to just put a plug in for influenza vaccines for your audience. You want something that'll protect you. Get your flu shot. And if you do have a respiratory illness, it is nice if you would put a mask on when you go out in public. It doesn't, unfortunately, masks get wet pretty quickly and aren't all that protective, but at least it's something.
It's more of a polite gesture is what you're saying.
Pretty much. Within about, I think about 10 or 15 minutes is pretty useless.
And to me, one of the confusing things that I think in the public, the general public, one of the things that confuses us is it seems like the experts are saying two different things, and they're confusing us a little bit, because when they say that you can't get it by droplets or atomization, like you were saying, Dr. Norman, through the air, then why would they say that if you haven't shown any symptoms, you shouldn't travel? Because if you're not contagious, when you don't show symptoms, why is it bad for a nurse who might be, quote unquote, in quarantine? Why is it bad for her to get on a plane and fly somewhere else? Because it would seem like, because of those guidelines and those statements, that she's not even at risk, or anyone coming in contact with her is not at risk at that time.
She's at low risk. Low risk doesn't mean no risk. And so even with a low-grade fever, you're at low risk for infecting a passenger sitting next to you. It doesn't mean you're at no risk. And so that's why when you become symptomatic with even with a low-grade fever, I think they find it as 101 degrees Fahrenheit, that you really should not be traveling. You really should not be coming in contact with other people, because at that time you are potentially infectious.
Because it wasn't clear that they were saying
not highly infectious, but there's still no risk.
But they weren't saying that she was showing any signs of fever when they were making a big stink about the fact that she was traveling.
Well, you're talking about I was talking about the nurse that got on the airplane to arrange her wedding plan. She did have a fever.
Okay. See, I didn't know that.
So what happened was it wasn't quite 101, and she called the CDC, and they said, well, it's not 101, so go ahead. But I think that was a bad call on their part.
What is 101? So let's right quick. Is that the turning point, like the undead, like at 101?
At 101 degrees Fahrenheit, if you're returning from West Africa, we would consider that an absolute for you to be tested for the presence of the Ebola virus.
Is it hard to, when you talk about being tested, these are just basic questions for me, is it hard for that test to be administered? Is it easily detected? Like, can you just draw blood right quick and go, there it is?
For you, it's not detected before. There's not enough viruses around to do the routine test that we do. There's not enough viruses until you become symptomatic. When you become symptomatic, that's the time we test you, and we have sophisticated blood tests that look for the viral genetic particles, the RNA, so-called PCR testing. There are other testing looking for viral proteins and looking for antibodies, but they're not as good as the PCR test. And by the time you develop antibodies to the virus, it's very, very late in the disease. You're actually recovering from the disease. So we routinely do the PCR test. Now remember, the blood is highly infectious, highly dangerous in someone who's been infected with Ebola virus who's symptomatic. In those cases, we have to have very sophisticated, careful techniques for managing that blood specimen, and that's why that has to be done in a healthcare facility.
So as I'm going to ask the two of you this question as well. Are being on the front lines, Dr. Norman, you being an infectious disease specialist, and Mom, you being a nurse who is an administrator, is there any personal concern do you just go head first into the situation almost like a soldier of medicine and just deal head on? Do you have a fear for yourself in confronting this situation?
Well, I think if we know how to protect ourselves, and so therefore, I don't think we're particularly that fearful.
Well, it's part of our job, and that's what we signed up
Yes.
for. But there's we're in my facility. We're asking for volunteers, and we have many volunteers who are willing to do it. But in order to take care of a patient who's ill with Ebola, you need to have a lot of training, and minimally 4 hours of training on how to get in and out of the protected equipment, personal protective equipment rather, and.
No, that's just our music
No,
that's
keep going.
telling us that we need to get to a break.
You're fine. I wanted to hear this.
Oh, well, so anyway, we view it as part of our job, and of course we'll be, not to say we won't be somewhat apprehensive and anxious if we go in the room with an actual sick Ebola patient, but we'll be trained, so we'll be as safe as possible.
Well, we definitely want to thank both of you guys for, being on the show with us today, Dr. Norman and Marlene McCraw. And we thank you for being on the front lines and keeping us safe.
And for all the information. And thank you for giving me permission to sterilize Dave. I'll get right on that as soon as we walk out of the studio.
Thank you
It's
for
time
inviting
to
me.
play the Marla and Dave Love
All right,
Game.
stick around, Mimi.
Here
It's
are
time for you to
Marla
play
and
the
Dave to
Mad Love
explain how it
Game.
works.
Thanks, Al.
Okay, well, we're going to play the Mad Love Game. It's a relationship game that was designed and created by Marla and I, by Marla and Dave, and it consists of 3 categories:
Marla,
communication, finance, and sex. And it is played by rolling the die that we custom created. It has the categories, and it also has lose a turn, and it has a wild sign,
This is
like
good.
Marla. And so when you land on wild, you can choose any category that you want. Marlene, we're going to ask you to roll the dice.
This is going to be a little weird. Please don't get sex. Please don't get sex. I can't do a sex card with my mother. It's not right.
What does it say?
Lose a turn. Well, there's only.
lose a
So then
turn.
we're going to let Tony roll. Tony, roll the dice. No.
Oh, it is the sex
Oh, I
category.
cannot do it.
So I'm going to choose a card, and I'm going to read it, and we're going to give Marlene a chance to answer this question. Marlene,
Mom, don't speak up on sex with me in the room. What are you doing?
Marlene,
I'm a child.
can a man break his penis? Is it possible to break a penis?
It absolutely is possible.
Oh!
And,
Broken penises all around.
spoken as a true health professional, the answer is yes. Ding, 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 ding. She got it correct. While there is no penis bone, you can break your penis all the same. It's called penile fracture. And it's not a subtle injury. When it happens, there's an audible pop or snap, and the penis turns black and blue, and it is terribly painful.
I've always said poles can be broken and holes are built to last.
Mimi, can you tell us a way that this can happen? It doesn't happen often, I'm sure.
Well, it doesn't happen often, but it can be induced
Mom,
by...
speaking to the mic. It's talking about sex here.
Yeah,
Speak right
it
up.
can be induced by medication many times. And
Medication?
yes.
You can break a penis by
That has to
giving
be
it-
the worst drug on the face of the earth.
Well-
hey, smoke this.
No, as a matter of fact, you hear on TV all the time these
porn stars.
enhancing drugs.
No, like the little blue pill or something
yes,
like
the
that.
blue
yes.
pill in particular. Everybody can't handle that, and so you have engorgement
Oh, more blood flow than you
of
can handle.
blood into the penis, and it doesn't
So
escape,
formal.
and so therefore it becomes
She's getting excited.
hard and it breaks.
I'm scared.
Oh, my goodness.
How about
well,
that?
Well, we want to thank you for playing the Mad Love Game, Marlene, and we're going to get right back to the show.
David is a thinker.
I never do anything without thinking about it first.
Marla is a feeler.
I basically wear my personality on my sleeve.
But when Marla and Dave get together, it's like a match dancing with a firecracker. This is the Marla and Dave Radio Show on the Universal Broadcast Network.
Okay, it's time for this week's poll
Hey, Dave, wait,
question.
stop. Do you remember what used to happen when we did the poll question? You gave me a note, you sang a note, and I sang a note, and we said, it's poll time. Remember that? What happened to that? Do you want to remix it one day? Okay, back to the poll.
Okay, the poll question this week was, do you believe the experts when they say Ebola is under control, or is there more to fear? The answers were, your options were yes, under control, and
No.
no,
Hashtag
be
be afraid.
And quite honestly, the public is very afraid because only 14% said yes, it's under control. And 86% said yes, be very afraid.
Ooh.
No, be afraid. Yes, but you know.
Well, I'm going to have to trust what Dr. Norman and Mimi were telling us. Keep calling her Mimi. Your grandma name keeps just... Oops. I
Wow.
said grandma.
Okay, so next week's poll
I'm a grandma.
question,
We're
we
friends.
want you guys to actually either catch us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Marlon, what are those handles?
You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at the MND Show, and that's spelling out the A-N-D. And you can find us on Facebook at the Marla and Dave Show.
Or right there on our front page of our website, www.marlandave.com, is where you'll find the poll question. And next week's poll question will be there, and it's, should drugs be legal?
And remember to stop by the www.marlandave.com always and see the Mad Selfie surveys that are videos. So you can check that out online following the show.
Absolutely.
Can you handle the truth? This is modern American dialogue in a mad world from two unique, fresh, transparent perspectives. This is the Marla and Dave Radio Show.
We want to thank all of you guys for joining us in the chat room. Remember, don't be afraid to call us, 323-284-7826.
And we have a lot of fun stuff coming up. Next week, we are going to be introducing our Mad Monthly charity, and our guest will be Mr. Clifford Harris, who's the founder of the Drug Alternative Program, and that's a very touching thing for us because that is the program that assisted our son in his recovery. So that'll be exciting.
We want to thank Dr. Norman and Marlene for stopping by. Marlene McCraw.
You were going to call her Mimi too, weren't you?
mother-in-law. I almost said Mimi.
Would you stop calling her mom? She's not your mother. How much did he weigh when he was born? Point in case. So therefore,
I know it didn't. Wasn't as painful as you were. Anyway, and we want to actually thank you for bringing some real information to a very scary subject.
and we're not getting out of here just yet before I remind everybody that the Mad merch has arrived.
Oh,
if you're
yeah.
looking at us, we are
Boom.
wearing, wait, here I go,
Boom.
elevation, chest up.
Yeah. let me let you get a good look.
There you go. The M&D, the Marla and Dave Show shirts are here. Please log on to our Mad merch, and we will begin to, hey, join us in our mad world. We want you to look like us so we can all just be one big happy family.
Now, everybody's not going to be able to get the special bling version of the T-shirt that Marla's wearing. That's a host shirt.
And Beauty and the Bling, Joy Silman is responsible for our designs here as far as our getting our shirts to us. So that's awesome. We appreciate that. She puts in a lot of work, and the product is off the chain. So that would pretty much do it. It is indeed.
Well, let me just remind everyone that Marla is in the doghouse. So again, Marla, is this your
You know
second
what?
or third week?
Dave, I could come
Would
hard.
this be 3 weeks?
I could come hard. I'm gonna get you. You overtalked me this week, but that's okay because
Wow.
no girl should have to sit in the parking lot for 2 hours waiting on a man that travels 3 times a week.
Again,
'Cause he
if you
doesn't
want
give
to
her the
put
right
American
information.
Airlines, U.S. Airways
No,
in
don't
the
try to make it
doghouse,
act like it's
go
that.
ahead and do that. But that wouldn't be my fault.
Why can't you carpool? Anyway,
What does that
that's
have to
the
do
question.
with anything?
Because then all the 2 wives and a significant other don't have to sit around waiting on the same people to go to the same spot.
Well, again, thank you
Wasted.
guys for stopping by, checking out the Marla and Dave Show.
We have a lot of fun
love
stuff
you.
coming up.
Absolutely.
Show up each Monday, Mad Mondays, right here with Marla and Dave. It's a mad world.
So let's talk about it.